In this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast, I am joined by Aamer Khan Sohel, a young conservationist working towards the conservation of red pandas in the hills of Darjeeling. We talk about his research on captive red pandas, community-led conservation efforts for the species, and his initiative to translate conservation to make the field more accessible. Do tune in to this episode. Give it 2 seconds. Yeah. So, welcome, Aamer, to the podcast. It's a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How did you get interested into conservation?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Like, I was an engineer and then I was doing my engineering, and probably I was in last year. So I read an article in one of the newspaper regarding wildlife, scenario in India and what lacks in Indian conditions. So I just got interested and I really wanted to, utilize technology for the betterment of animals and human as such. So that is where first I started to look into field of biology, wildlife biology, and conservation. Yeah.
How did Project Red Panda come into being, and what is your long-term vision here?
The Project Red Panda started when I was an MSc student. So when I was looking for my dissertation topic for my master's, I landed up another article thanks to my reading, habit, which then that article introduced me to red pandas, and I started reading about red pandas, and I realized that yes, this is a species I can contribute to, because there were very few papers on red pandas then, both from wild and from the zoos, and we pretty much knew nothing, I would say, like 10 years back. And then I thought of taking that as one of my study spaces. So that is how it started. And further, when I started to look like what I can study on red pandas, then suddenly something came up to my mind, like why not behavior? Because there was very few studies on red panda behavior, and behavior is one of the basic things that can take us to the basic biology of the species, and that is how I started. But overall, when I started working with the zoos and in the wild as well, I started to develop this on for a long-term project, and with a vision that we should combine different interdisciplinary approaches to understand red panda, and as such to conserve this endemic species of Eastern Himalaya, which further would obviously benefit the landscape as such, because red pandas are indicator species. So we cannot forget that. So it's not only the red panda I'm targeting, but I'm really targeting the whole landscape and the problems they have now and then. So red panda is actually can divide Red Panda project into 3 different pillars. Then I have a research component, then I have a community engagement component, and I also do have an education component. So Red Panda deals with these 3 different monitoring of the species and the habitat. Yeah.
So you have conducted substantial amount of research on captive red pandas. Why have you focused on red pandas in captivity?
When I started doing my master's, so I was, obviously with few resources, fundings, and all the things obviously matter. But my basic aim was to understand red pandas in captive breeding. So we do have a captive breeding program for red pandas, because red pandas are not doing well in the wild, and there is a technology called conservation breeding or captive breeding, which Darjeeling Zoo, with the collaboration of Government of India and international zoos, have started program called conservation breeding program in early 19, and they are breeding red pandas in the zoo, and then the final aim is to reintroduce red pandas back in the wild. So this is how the red panda has been approached by Indian zoos and Indian conservation scientists. So my aim was to understand what's happening both in the zoo and in the wild, because once we bred them and reintroduce, that is what the aim of the conservation breeding program. So I thought that we should put both in Titan Zoo and the field as well. So that is what the phase 1 of my project was totally focused on, the and phase 2, which I've started in last year, will be fully focused on the field research or field conservation. But the basic idea is to understand what's happening in these two entities and learn from each other. So if you see, I'll give an example of few species like black ferret and golden tamarind, golden lion tamarind. These species had their conservation breeding program, but they failed because the individuals were not well trained to forage and to understand the threat around them. So what happened in captive breeding, when you bred individuals, they're actually totally captive bred and they don't know about the wild conditions. For example, they don't know how to forage and how to get rid of the predators. So these are the two basic skills which any individual surviving in the wild should have. And wild individuals, that through instinct, right? But in the zoo, are bred in the zoo for long, long years and they have not seen the outside world. They're not well skilled into that. So our job is to hone those skills for this individual. So that is why I started understanding the breeding program, what are the information is lacking and why we have not able to reintroduce got first introduction of red pandas in 2003. And after that, very recently, Government of India have started reintroducing like in 2019. So there was a gap of 20 years. So I really wanted to know what's happening in the breeding program before I jump to the wild. So I can connect this link and that will be better for the conservation. So that's why I've started understanding their welfare behavior, their general behavior in terms of, the enrichment patterns. And then we also train them before releasing. So I was also part of the conservation breeding program for some time, the Darjeeling Zoo. And when they selected 4 individuals in 2019 to release, I got the job to train them for foraging skills and for threat analysis or predator avoidance behavior with the zoo staff. And that is how this research, keep working forward with understanding each and every component of the research as well as the implementation parts, because these two, the management and the research has to go parallel if we really want to save any species. Right. So that is how the first phase was totally focused on captive breeding and in the zoo, and that is what now we have most of the information what I thought we could do through the research, and over the 4-5 years I've published all of them, and now I'm jumping to the phase 2, which is in the wild, and then maybe end of phase 2 we can have comprehensive picture like how we are gonna approach this species for better conservation. Yeah.
To talk about the community conservation and education part of your project.
So talking about the research, and we're generating evidence-based case studies or evidence-based research for species of red pandas. But if you don't involve community or you don't understand what community knows for this species, or for matter of fact any wild species, approaches are not that successful, and we have learned from past with many species. The community conservation component in my project specifically target one basic question, that how we can utilize the traditional knowledge of these individuals, community individuals, and also integrate them into the research techniques and then make a long-term monitoring program. So another drawback of a lot of other species fallback is that there's no long-term monitoring program. So if you that individual you reintroduce back in the wild, but there's no long-term monitoring program. And I can understand, for example, with respect to red panda, due to the mountainous terrain and due to the lot of cost involved, this long-term monitoring program is not possible. And that's the reason we have not seen any long-term monitoring program. I'm talking about at least 7 to 10 years of monitoring program for red pandas. And that's the reason we are lacking a lot of information, like how climate is affecting these species, because they are indicator species, right? So how it is affecting the panda as an indicator species, and in terms how the landscape is changing. So to fill this gap, I am thinking that I can train local individual using their knowledge and also using scientific techniques, which I will tend to, make them understand or make them learn through this project. And at the end of the day, we have an RB of individual who can monitor red pandas on daily basis, and maybe at the end of 5, 6, or 7 years, we'll get some trends of population estimation that will make us understand, okay, how the climate is affecting these species. For example, anthropogenic factor like tourism is affecting this particular species, and in turn the landscape of, Eastern Himalayas. So that is the very integral part which I'm trying to focus through the community conservation program when a local individual. Yeah.
So, talk about red panda conservation broadly. How is the species faring in Darjeeling, and what is the primary threats they face in the region and other parts of India?
Yeah, Darjeeling is actually a very important area in terms of red panda conservation because we have national parks in the landscape, which is Singalila and New Reveri National Park, and they are the two important reintroduction sites. So, Government of India has chosen these two sites to part of the reintroduction program. So, whenever an individual bet in the zoo, Darjeeling Zoo, which is the same landscape, they go and release back in the Singalila and New Reveri. So, what are some of these areas? So, the captive breeding program itself is a great initiative for the species in the landscape, which is started by Government of India and the zoo. Apart from that, Sikkim, that landscape and harbors a good population of red panda. So WWF Sikkim, with again government of Sikkim department, is really doing great with their red panda guardian program, which is quite similar to forest guardian program, which is done by the red panda network in Nepal, which is again in the same landscape as a broader, if we speak. Come to the threats. What I understood that the human encroachment and increasing tourism is something affecting wildlife, in terms of as a whole, if we see the wildlife of this area, including the red panda, and habitat degradation, because obviously when the human pressure is increased on this landscape, for example, for the tourism, so we need a lot of food, a lot of shelter, and then hence the bamboo cuttings, for example, because bamboo is an important ingredient of red panda diet, and that is how it is. It is also the habitat is getting degraded for the red panda. So habitat degradation and human encroachment is the two important, aspect of the threats. Third thing is climate change, and we know actually very how that climate change is affecting. We know that climate change and the pressure increase in the world is it's quite hampering the mountain areas and Eastern Himalaya as such. But how microhabitat is affecting, closely with respect to climate change and on this ecology of the red panda and other species is something which don't know. We don't know. So another threat is, warming climate, but we really don't know much about it, and that should also focus. Apart from this, another growing threat in this region, and we have some couple of articles from the Nepal region that feral dogs is actually chasing red panda and killing them. So I have not got any information from the Darjeeling area, and that is another aspect of research that we also want to understand what growing threats are there in the Darjeeling landscape. But if from Nepal we got some information, and that could be one thing which we can also categorize as a threat for red pandas in Darjeeling and respective areas.
So, you are also working on translating conservation. Why is this necessary, and what do you aim with this initiative?
Translating conservation was again an initiative to spread the complex science, what we do as a researcher, as a scientist, to common people in language that they could understand. Because what I believe when I started this translation conservation, the Wild Foundation Global, the idea was to break down this complex scientific information to people like who are working 9 to 5, and they really just want to get the gist of what article says or what conservation effort says, and then so if you don't make complex science or conservation understand to the common people, it's very difficult that you can get their support. For example, Wildlife Protection Act lately has a lot of amendment, but common people wouldn't understand how this, clause and other scientific information works. So we need to also break down these things to common people so we can gain their support and we can fight back for such, initiatives. So the idea was very simple, just to reach out to the ground people and make them understand what we really do as a conservationist or as a scientist. And I chose to write as the articles, break down scientific papers into simple articles and spread them around people, also through engaging stories. So we're also working to have animated stories or, in a cartoon form or a comic form, let's say. That's what we are working on. One of the stories with red pandas in a comic form that we can make them understand what is captive breeding, what is conservation science. So that is the idea behind that, to spread conservation science.
And how can individuals contribute to Project Red Panda?
Well, awareness is something very important. So if you see, red pandas are actually discovered 48 years or 50 years, before the giant panda. But till date, I have seen when I was going around the landscape and even in different places and meeting people, that they hardly know red pandas. Pandas, they would just think about, giant panda, black and white panda. And I've seen like even parents saying to their kids when they visit the zoo, like, oh, this is the same panda, like, Chinese panda, and they will grow and they'll become black and white. Well, I mean, that's not the case, right? But it's a very misinformation. So the basic thing is the awareness. So if you go and read more about these species and trying to understand what role they bring into our life, to environment as such, would be interesting. So I would say seek knowledge not only on red pandas but other wildlife species, other species, forests, and other things. And that is would be the greater contribution, that you are seeking knowledge, you are trying to educate yourself on wildlife conservation. That would be one thing. Second thing, I would say, if you really want to connect to the Project Red Panda and trying to contribute, come. There's a site which you can visit, aamerswell.com, where I have shown all my work over there, and I'm seeking help. Like, for example, volunteers who can write articles for my translation conservation program, and if they want to come and support being in the field, I'm also open to look for volunteers and interns who can really come and support and give their time and also learn about the nature and wildlife as such. So that would be my suggestion to people.
And what have been some of your most prominent challenges from your career in conservation and uh, best memories?
Yeah, there were a lot of challenge. Like when you work as an independent researcher, raising funds is something very difficult. So I remember when I started working with Red Panda, I was an MSc student, and I was obviously struggling with the funds. And thankfully, like Darjeeling Zoo and Sikkim and Nainital Zoo came forward to support some aspect of it. And one of like couple of my mentors from UK and US, they also come forward to support this. So those were the days when I was actually struggling to get a lot of funds and try to make this phase one happen. But certainly, eventually, it did happen. But after that, for the field part, which required a lot of money, like I told you, why the long-term studies are not, in place till now for the red pandas, because of the mountainous terrain and the illustrious spaces, we need a lot of money involved to run these projects, and that is why it took me almost reach out to a lot of funding. So I would say once would be what was something very challenging, but once you hit the door, once you knock the door and then you start getting funds, then it's just a game of time. Like you keep applying and you keep working hard toward that. So that was my challenging part, and my happiest part was like when I got scholarship from the University of Adelaide, and they accepted Project Red wholeheartedly with the guidance and with the funding support. That was something I could not imagine, because I worked for this proposal for last 6 to 7 years and knocking a lot of doors. And finally, when it worked, and now I can see that it's going to implement in India, in Darjeeling Himalayas for at least next 3 to 4 years. That is something I'm really happy about. So yeah, these were the mixed projects over the last 7 years.
That is the last question I had for you today. Thank you so much for taking time out for this.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.